Welcome to the Decentered podcast. I'm Sean Tilley, and I'm here with Manton Reece. He is the creator of Micro.Blog, and he is joining us today to talk about his journey and his experience with developing for the social web, as well as his background with indie web and some of what he's doing with his company. Thank you for joining me, Manton.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So, a good way that we start out on our podcast for every single episode is that we talk a little bit about the backgrounds of the people that are joining us. Would you be comfortable with sharing with our audience just who you are, where you come from, and what your story? I guess
Sure.
the question is, how did you get to this point?
Yeah, great question. It's been a bit of a journey, but a longtime Mac developer is how I usually think about myself, kind of in the Apple developer ecosystem world with making Mac apps in like 90s and early 2000s and then iPhone apps. And then at some point I became kind of frustrated with social media and like the way Twitter was treating developers, and this like before Elon Musk, like 10 years ago. And so I got more into my own blog and thinking about products that could help people blog. And that is really where Micro.Blog came from. And I'm the founder of Micro.Blog, and that's where I focus all my indie web and Fediverse related time trying to make that better.
That's awesome. So, I saw that you had a successful Kickstarter campaign in 2017. You raised a little over like $85,000 to start this project. What was that experience like, having that campaign close, knowing that it was successful, and then like trying to figure out, okay, how do I build this thing?
Yeah, it was an amazing experience. It was definitely strange in that I didn't know how it was. I'd never done a Kickstarter campaign before. I had no idea what the reaction would be, and I set my goal like way lower. I think it was like $10,000. I'm like,
Oof.
will I meet that? Like, will 5 people back this? Like, who knows? And in hindsight, I did a couple things right because I was blogging about these ideas about the open web, and I had a mailing list that where I asked, not like a newsletter, but like people could sign up if they were interested in like an announcement about this. And so I was able to like on day one send an email to them saying, hey, you should back this, and et cetera. And so I was blown away by the response. A little over 3,000 people backed it, and I was really excited. And it just made a lot of things easier because this is something I wanted to build anyway. But having like that kind of audience that was ready to try out the beta, ready with feedback. Even, I mean, a lot of people backed it and they didn't quite know what it was. Maybe they still don't know in some cases. But just having that kind of community was really helpful. I learned a lot. I made a whole bunch of mistakes with the Kickstarter also, but I learned a lot. And I am still, that was the beginning of 2017. We're in 2024. So it's been a long time, and it has been admittedly like it's taken pretty much until this point to deliver all the promises to backers, because Micro.Blog went smoothly, I think, and it's improved, all the time since then. But I also, as part of the Kickstarter, wrote a book about blogging, and that has taken a long time to get out and to iterate on. And also the world changes. So like last year, everything happened with Twitter and with Mastodon and with Threads and Blue Sky, and there's just so much activity in the social web and the Fediverse that I had to go back to the book and like edit it and like add some more sections. So it's kind of never ending, but I think I'm at the end of it.
No, it's really hard to kind of keep a pulse on all the different things that are happening. We try our best here, but like it feels like everything is speeding up, and if you're trying to like be comprehensive in how you write about everything, there's just more stuff by the time you're done writing about the last thing you wrote down. So it's definitely a challenge. So I saw that on your website you mentioned that you co-authored the JSON feed technology, and I imagine that was probably pretty instrumental in part of how Micro.Blog works. Could you talk about maybe some of your background with the engineering side of things?
Sure. And JSON feed is really fascinating. And it wasn't just Brent Simmons led the effort on that. I'm also like, my name's on it, but a bunch of other people helped out with it. And the idea with that was, we all love RSS. as a way to connect blogs together and as a way to connect, even social networks together in some cases. Although unfortunately, most social networks have sort of dropped support for, Twitter used to have RSS support. They dropped it. Blue Sky just added RSS support like a month ago. So I thought that was really interesting because the way I look at it is the more like open formats, or like if I build a product, I want it to support like as many open APIs and formats as possible. And
Yeah.
so, and there's definitely some pushback of like, why reinvent the wheel? And I totally get that, but it's been so long since RSS was kind of frozen, and there's so many developers that just don't work with XML anymore.
Yeah.
That we felt
No.
like, if we want the open web to actually continue to improve, we need to like meet developers where they are. And so having a JSON version of kind of what RSS is for was the idea. And so, yeah, Micro.Blog uses it all throughout the platform. So like pretty much any part of the API is returned with JSON feed. Like if it's a list of things that come back from the API, that's going to be JSON feed. And then of course we host blogs for people, and of course those all have RSS and
Oh
JSON
yeah.
feed. And it's just super useful. Like it honestly, I mean, it's not that hard to parse RSS feeds, but you got to figure out if you do it yourself, have a library that does it for you. There's a lot of weird uh, gotchas between Atom and RSS
Yep.
and badly formatted feeds. So having something that sits alongside that is just really convenient.
And JSON is relatively straightforward as far as just hacking something together is
Yep.
concerned. Even someone with my lowly skills, I've been able to hack around with like the Mastodon API and do like custom front end development just by like reading JSON responses. And
Mm-hmm.
having that, I think, is a godsend compared to the monstrosity that's XML.
Yeah,
So,
totally. And the other thing, like I read about this in my book a little bit, but the idea, and something I think the indie web believes in too, of like using existing web standards
oh
for like
yeah,
microblogging and social networking. And so like if you have any formatting in your post, you might want to have an inline link or like bold text. And like HTML is actually pretty good at that. It's kind of a solved problem. And when you start to put HTML inside RSS, it becomes very
oh
unreadable. It's kind of
yeah.
an encoding nightmare. And so, yeah, JSON is just really useful for that kind of stuff.
100%. So, mentioning open web standards for a moment, one of the things that I think is very interesting about Micro.Blog is that technically it's within the Fediverse. It uses ActivityPub to
Mm-hmm.
talk to the Fediverse, and it has basically been that way for a long time now. But, like, at what point did you decide that, hey, we're going to adopt this and we're going to talk to Mastodon and be part of this bigger thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like even like Mastodon and Micro.blog kind of developed in parallel. Like I think he shipped a little bit before I did, maybe by 6 months or something like that.
Yeah.
And then of course Mastodon has gotten way more attention as sort of like a good default place for people that are bailing on their previous social
Yeah.
network. Um, and at some point, a few years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, I kind of had to take a step back and like, do I want to compete with every other project that's out there, or do I want to just work with them and embrace what they're doing? And so I decided to support ActivityPub, and we've been supporting it ever since. And like the first version a few years ago wasn't great. I mean, it worked with Mastodon, but when Mastodon really started taking off a year ago, 2 years ago, uh, I was able to go and improve a whole bunch more and got a lot of good feedback from people. So now it's pretty seamless. Like I have my blog hosted on Micro.blog. It supports ActivityPub. People on Mastodon can follow me. I can follow them. Replies go back and forth. A lot of people just think I'm using Mastodon. They don't even really, and which is
Yeah.
great. Like
No,
people,
it's
you,
what
you
you
shouldn't
want.
have to. Yeah, you shouldn't have to really think about it. And so obviously there's more to do, but that in a way, I was always wanting to support as many, open APIs. And so even before ActivityPub, I supported some of the indie web protocols like MicroPub for posting and
Yep.
WebMention for sending replies back and forth. But I think the ActivityPub in a way was like kind of a turning point where I realized I'm not going to compete with everything. I'm going to be compatible with everything.
Yeah.
So we post to Blue Sky, we post to Noster, we put, it's like, and that it kind of unlocks something in my brain about like Now, when a new social network comes along or a new API, I don't have to think about it too hard. I just think about like, if I was a user of my platform, would I want it to be compatible with that? And if
Right.
the answer is yes, then, I try to support it.
Is it challenging to add new platforms, or have you like kind of figured out architecturally speaking, like, hey, I've abstracted everything away, adding a new service is relatively easy?
It's still, no, it's hard still. It depends. We have like ActivityPub and some of the web and some of the indie web protocols are the only things that are like really tightly integrated into
Hmm.
Micro.Blog. So like if you're on the Micro.Blog timeline and someone replies from Mastodon to you, like it shows up in your mentions, like it's all pretty seamless. And then some of the other services we support are more like one way. Like the
Yeah.
indie web thinks about like Posse, like post to your own site,
Yep.
syndicate elsewhere. And so like the Blue Sky support and like the Nostr support and LinkedIn and things like that
It's all
are sort
cross
of like that.
posted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you post to your blog and then it sends it out. So like I've thought about adopting the Blue Sky's AT protocol, and we support like a little tiny bit of it
Yeah.
just in terms of the cross posting, but like to fully integrate it, it is a lot of work. Things are
Yeah.
not abstracted at that level.
It's funny that you mentioned that because we had Ryan Barrett on the other week. He's from Bridgie
Yeah.
and he was just talking about some of the challenges of trying to do AT Proto's Federation API, and like just
Mm-hmm.
the sheer amount of work you have to do compared to just writing a JSON client is insane. Like there are
Yeah.
so many requirements, but it's cool to hear that at least you've given it some thought.
Yeah, and I'd love to do more. And yeah, and the Bridgie is a fascinating project,
Yeah.
and there's some basic support in Micro.Blog for it, so that definitely like if you, well, it doesn't work with Twitter anymore because they kind of shut down their API, but things like Blue Sky has, Bridgie has support for, and so if you have your blog configured on Micro.Blog correctly, Bridgie can find replies on Blue Sky and send them over to Micro.Blog, and you can see them in the timeline. You can't reply to those yet, so like it's not 100% where it should be. But having those kind of projects like Bridgie, I think there should be more bridges
Yeah.
like that and more sort of gateways that connect services, because I think it can be really interesting.
Well, not to mention, I think, the people that hack on these things, it helps build a lot of expertise between A, is it even possible to make services talk to each other that way? And
Yeah.
B, like, how hard is it? Like, what do I need to know as an engineer or a developer to make that even happen? And that's like a pretty obscure thing at this point.
Yeah, and some of this stuff is just kind of difficult. Like, I mean, even ActivityPub is, I mean, it's pretty complicated. Like,
Yeah.
and it's not just like you can read this one spec. It's like three or four different specs that you have to figure out how they fit together and how Mastodon supports them. Because if you're not compatible
Yeah.
with Mastodon, forget it. So there's still it feels very early still in
Yeah.
this in where we are.
Yeah, I think like probably within the next year or two, especially with threads coming in, a lot of things might get more standardized. But
Mhm.
until then, it's always been kind of a hodgepodge. Even with host status back in the day, like there are parts of the spec that are just completely undocumented, like using Webfinger to
Right.
figure out what resource lives in an address. You would think like at this point we just bring it into the fold, but no, like it's just an unspoken extra thing.
Right.
And because Mastodon uses it, everybody else uses it too. Because why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So,
No, I think
um,
the way that's developed is really interesting, and I'm not. I feel like there's still more room to go to make it
yeah,
user friendly and to like make these services like the way they think about user profiles like as compatible as possible. And like speaking of like Blue Sky, one of the things I really like about it is that their usernames are domain names,
yeah,
which instead of like the email style Mastodon usernames. I like the domain names because then it's like your blog, your identity, it's all kind of like controlled by you,
yeah,
your domain name. So I think there's a lot of potential there too. But how do you make all this stuff work together?
yeah. And some things like you might not necessarily want to make them work together. You wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily want like a music sharing platform to be able to take in like upvotes from a Reddit like platform. Like that might not make
Right.
sense at all.
Yeah.
But I think like there's a basic like graceful degradation way of doing things where everything degrades into a note and most platforms can read that. And for them, that's good enough. Um,
No, yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I think it would be a shame if all platforms ended up looking exactly the same. So like we need that kind of like
yeah.
diverse user interfaces and concepts. And yeah, as long as there's sort of like bare minimum of like you said, like a note, like a microblog post, like just like some little bit of text that's compatible. Other services should be free to like be creative and do their own thing.
Yeah. So with that in mind, like, do you feel comfortable talking a little bit about your product and, how it's different, how it stands on its own?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, the basic idea with Micro.Blog has always been if we just post to our blog more, a couple things happen that are really powerful. Like one is we control our content. Like we can have our own domain name. Here's our content. So instead of having all the content that I posted for 10 years at twitter.com/whatever, it's at my domain name. So like I can move it if I'm not happy with my web host, move it somewhere else. This is sort of like basic web stuff, but I feel like we've gotten away from it with the centralized nature of some of these massive platforms where like we're putting everything into Facebook and Instagram and you can't really move. I mean, you could export your data, but you can't move your URLs because Facebook owns them.
Yeah.
You can't move your followers. And so with Micro.Blog, trying to get that part first is like encourage people to post to their own site and have a timeline and have like a social network kind of experience. But at your own site with open APIs. That was like the core part. And then from there, like a lot of interesting things happen when you can, like the idea that you could have lots of networks, for example, and you could move your content and your identity between them. It also, I think, helps different platforms have more control over like who they ban or how they moderate their platforms, because you're not Twitter always got into trouble with moderation because like if you ban someone, like they're gone, they can't move somewhere else
Yeah.
exactly. And so they had to be very careful about like how are we going to moderate the platform. So that's something the Fediverse I think has done a great job with. It was like getting people to think about having lots of servers and lots of places that we could potentially move our
Right.
stuff.
Because there's always some other place that you can go to. And it's been
Mm-hmm.
kind of funny in the past, Um, I think like deplatforming through like the late 2010s, seeing like Alex Jones and a couple of people kicked off,
Yeah.
and that was kind of like a jeer on maybe part of left Twitter was that haha, you don't have a place to go to anymore. But like on an individual basis, that's actually a really not great situation for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, that was the social space where I hung out and talked to people and exchanged
Mm-hmm.
ideas and sort of put my presence out there. On the one hand, I think like communities should be able to self-regulate that and say, you're spreading hate speech, you're spreading weird conspiracy theories, we don't want you. But like the dominance of one platform and not really having a viable alternative creates so many different problems and creates so many weird, like, am I walking on thin ice for posting this kind of territory for a lot of people?
Yeah, no, it does. I think the fewer huge platforms we have, the more problems it creates.
Yeah.
And so like I think the world will definitely be better, like the social web world, if we had maybe not millions. Like I don't think we need like a platform for like every type of person, like every viewpoint necessarily, but
Yeah.
like you could, but like uh, having more like medium-sized platforms instead of huge, massive platforms, it just frees things up a lot. If
Yeah.
you have everything on Facebook, if you have billions of people just using one platform, it's almost like an unwinnable challenge. It's just really difficult.
I think it's also noteworthy too that a lot of that can dictate user behavior in more subtle ways. I think a good example is YouTube, for example. If you look like at any popular video, typically their thumbnail will like be a reaction pic of them making a face, and like the headline will be like a weird question, such and such happened on this date. How? And the guy will look really confused and shocked. And
Yeah.
like they have to say things a certain way and phrase things a certain way, and
Yeah.
basically do their own version of search engine optimization for YouTube. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, if anybody goes outside of the boundaries, like, they're typically not going to be as popular, get as many views. And
Yeah.
so, I think on the Fediverse, at least my experience with PeerTube, like, yeah, it's a small platform. I don't have to do that though. Like, I can just put whatever's on my mind, and I could put a thumbnail of like a leaf blowing in the wind if I really wanted to, and people would still watch it because
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to adhere to that to be promoted.
Right.
So
No, no, totally. And like I like making videos every once in a while, usually like screencasts and things like that. But I would hate to feel that I had to have those sort of like clickbait thumbnails and those sort of like gimmicks on YouTube. I just feel like it cheapens like everything. I don't know. No offense to like YouTubers that have
no, no,
been
no,
successful at that, but I don't love it. I much
no.
prefer being able to post my stuff, and if people want to read it, they subscribe to the podcast or they follow the feed. Um, and on the consuming side, I also prefer just a straight up reverse chronological timeline of people I follow. I don't need recommendations. I don't need an algorithm. And we are very at Micro.Blog, we're very sort of like anti algorithms. Like
Mm,
there's no, like almost nothing could be thought of as like some algorithm or like trending thing. It's like our discover section is hand curated.
yeah.
We try to lean into that sort of human side of things, and we still can because we're still pretty small relatively.
Yeah, no, and I had seen based on the front page of Micro.Blog's website that it looks like you have about maybe 4 or 5 people working for Micro.Blog. Is that correct?
So sort of. I mean, it's really it's part-time people, I guess. That's
Yeah,
how,
yeah, yeah.
that's how I would say. Mostly me and Jean McDonald, who's our community manager, and she handles a lot of the moderation and like every year we usually do a conference for folks in the community, and she handles that, or like podcasting and interviewing people, and then another developer that helps with the mobile stuff and the web stuff, and so yeah, I would say me plus a handful of part-time people. So still pretty small.
No, and that's honestly pretty cozy.
Yeah.
I think having a small operation that's very comfortable and familiar with the people within it is really kind of the sweet spot, especially like as a tech startup. Because once you start getting like super big, like the whole company and its method of operating can change.
Like I wish we were bigger. Like I wish
Yeah,
like
yeah. I'm not
we
saying
could
it's
have,
bad.
yeah, like a little bigger. Like I wish we could have like, let's say 10 full-time people, half of which are handling like customer support and community issues. Like that would be really great because sometimes we do get overwhelmed. But yeah, I from the start, I've never wanted to be, we've never taken any VC money or anything like that. It was all from the Kickstarter and from actual subscriptions that people pay to host their blog. And so, yeah, I would never want to be, even 100 people would be way too many. I always
No,
want to stay smallish, 10 people, 20 people.
no, that's terrific. So within the last year, actually within maybe the last 6 months, the big platform for publishing newsletters, Substack, has been seeing a lot of backlash as far
Mm-hmm.
as their policies on Nazi content, hate speech, that kind of thing. And a lot of people are looking for alternatives. Have you seen any migration to Micro.Blog as a result of that?
A little bit. So we do have a newsletter feature. It's kind of interesting because it doesn't work exactly like any other newsletter platform.
Yeah.
So it's honestly not. It's not as an easy migration in some cases. So the way our stuff works is everything we do is around designed around blogs, or there's some link to blogs. And so the idea at the beginning was like you're posting all these short posts. You can have full length essays on your blog, but a lot of times it's just a short stuff or a photo. Like, what if we had a feature where, like, every week it would just like collect all those little short posts and send them out to your subscribers in an email newsletter? And so there's some tweaks there you can do with settings, but that's the basic way it works. So instead of having content that's like separate from the blog, where like Monday morning I'm going to like type up a newsletter for my subscribers, like instead you just blog and then it handles sending stuff out.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I like the way that works, but it's not exactly like Substack. So like we have definitely had people interested, but I don't really have a good, here's exactly how you should migrate.
No, no.
and we also don't have like any kind of monetization for your newsletter. So if someone has lots of paid subscribers on Substack, we don't really have a solution for them right now.
No,
Maybe we
that's
will at some point.
yeah.
Um, but I mean, I've definitely been following all the Substack stuff. I've been fascinated with it. They really ran into some trouble. I don't know if this is too much of a detour, but like
No, no,
I
no.
think they did. They'd done some really interesting stuff over the years with their platform, but
Yeah.
I think they ran into trouble, especially when they are promoting and helping, certain types of content make money. And how, like, the problem is once you have like trends or like popular newsletters or featured newsletters, or when you're sort of reaching out, you're becoming more than just like an infrastructure platform. You're
Yeah.
like really part of, uh, promoting and highlighting different newsletters, and then you can't just say free speech hands off, like we don't
Yeah,
care what people
no,
post,
because
because you're involved in it
you're
now.
obviously, yeah. And this kind of like boils down to the whole like Section 230 question of like are, is a platform or is it a publisher? Like, are you involved in the promotion of what's on your platform, or
Right.
are you just this like agnostic, neutral, like we're just the water company, we don't have any opinions on who drinks the water kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes there's some gray area where it's hard to know. Like there's like a, between your, you know, cable internet provider and Facebook, there's like a range of different types of services. But I feel like that's where people get into trouble, is they're not exactly sure where they are. Are they infrastructure? Are they helping promote people's content? What kind of decisions are they making, as part of curation and, highlighting things. And so, yeah, it's, we think about this stuff a lot with Micro.Blog, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in my book about this, but like a lot of the things that Micro.Blog can't do are to try to avoid some of these issues, like even just like not having algorithms, not having like counts, not having trending, tags and topics and stuff. Like just trying to make it just simpler. You follow people, you see what they post. I think it helps avoid some of the traps that people fall into.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So you don't have any trending algorithms. You don't take account of likes on posts. You're not like boosting anything in the timeline to appear at the top. It's
Nope.
just people see things in their timeline and they react to it, and that's just primarily what you have.
That's what we have. Yeah. And if that doesn't work for you, I mean, there's a lot of other social networks. So
Totally.
it's cool. It's like, and again, that kind of gets back to like, it's okay, I think, if different platforms work a little differently. There can be a space. I think a lot of our customers appreciate that Micro.Blog can be a little bit quieter, a little bit not as like, I don't know, not as intense, like where you're always reloading and you're always getting into an argument with someone. Um, we're not immune to that, but like
No.
trying to encourage maybe a little bit of a slower pace when possible sometimes.
No, and I think that very much suits blogging. What's interesting though is it sounds like your concept of a blog, it's not just text, which I think is what a lot of people fall back on when they try to understand what is a blog on the internet in 2024. It sounds like, from what I was looking at for Micro.Blog's feature set, you have a whole swath of things. You've got themes, you've got blogging, you've got link sharing, you have a bookshelf, reading tracker. Could you speak to like some of the things that you use on Microblog every day?
Yeah, I think I use almost all the features because for them to be prioritized, I usually
Yeah.
there's something about it that I liked. Yeah, like for my blog, it's hosted on Micro.Blog. I have my own domain name there, and I used to use WordPress. Before that, I used Movable Type and other things, and I just migrated all the posts to Micro.Blog. You can import from a whole bunch of places. So a lot of what I post is short, like little text posts, but I also post photos, like
Mhm.
this kind of stuff that I would post to Instagram. I post square photos, on my blog. I still like square photos. And so it's really nice because, if you go to my blog and click on the photos link, you can see a nice, grid of all my photos, and I have total control over that. So if I want to change the theme, if I want to like change the layout, uh, if you're technical and you want to get into sort of like the nitty gritty of like how things work, you have a lot of control. Under the hood, we actually use the Hugo static site generator. So
Oh,
like,
okay.
yeah, so like if you know Hugo or you want to learn some of it, You can kind of almost do whatever you want, but we have this sort of like, uh, layer on top for like managing posts and publishing and all this kind of thing, for handling themes and plugins. But you have just a lot of flexibility if you want to get down there and fiddle with stuff. So I use all of that, and the bookshelf reading is, it kind of, we started it. I don't even remember exactly what just like kicked it off, except that I was frustrated with, like, do I really want to put all my content into Goodreads? Do I really need a
No.
silo that just like has all my stuff? And so like, I'll post to my blog a little short, like, hey, I just finished reading this book. I really liked it. You know, interesting story, whatever, just a few, maybe a sentence, maybe nothing. And so building that into Micro.Blog, where um, it'll track the books you're reading, the books you want to read, books you finish reading, and then it can do fun stuff. So like at the end of the year, it can do like an end of year post for you with like a grid of all the
Nice.
thumbnails of all the book covers that you read. And just, I love having that stuff on my blog, because I mean, one of the things about blogging that's so interesting to me is, with social networks, a lot of times it's really fleeting. It's like you post something and you forget about it and you never go back. And I feel
Yeah.
like with a blog, sometimes you go back, like I wrote something like 5 years ago, or this post about the books I read 5 years ago. And it's just really meaningful, I think. Not everybody feels that way. I feel that way.
Mm.
Looking back on some of the stuff that I was working on, reading, thinking about. So yeah, we have the whole bookshelf thing, and we have a whole mobile app just for the books stuff. It's called Epilogue. So
Nice.
you can you fire up another, app on your phone. You can quickly say, I want to read this book, or search for a book. So it's fun. It feels separate from blogging in a way, but it really isn't, because it's like the idea of just like putting stuff on your own site. It's like,
Yeah.
I read this
Because
book. I want to blog about it easily.
even if you use like a dedicated app, like you were talking about for the bookshelf, like all of that ultimately reincorporates back onto your own blog. Like
Correct.
your
Yep.
blog is still the central repository of the things you're doing, which I think is a
Yep.
very like novel way of understanding it. Play on words. I think
Nice.
I think that the important thing is that like for users, your website can be anything you want it to be, and if you all of your stuff lives there, you have total control over it. You can curate your experience however you wish. So
Yeah.
that's super cool.
Yeah. Totally. And it's like, we're kind of used to, it's like websites started to all look the same. It's like every Facebook profile page looks the same. And yeah, you could have an
Yeah,
image and background stuff, but like, it is every once in a while I'll like run across a website that just like looks completely different. It's like someone's
yeah,
blog and they just like went crazy with it. And I love seeing that. I think that's one of the things that makes the web so interesting, is like these little corners of the internet where people just had fun and they customized this space to just be what they want.
yeah. It definitely feels like something that's been lost over the years. Just this kind of shift to a more cookie cutter, standardized way of building the web. I know that like for a while, it felt like every single site was using Bootstrap,
Right.
and that's nothing against it. It was super useful for me when I was doing rapid prototyping, but like it felt even more like every website looked the same for a while, and then every once in a while you'll see a guy that like maybe when you move the mouse like a unicorn vomits rainbows, or like just you can drag and drop pieces of the interface. Or I think my favorite one that I've ever seen, this lady was a CSS developer, and every single breakpoint of the browser's width would show a different layout of her personal website. So
Yeah.
you'd move it down, and suddenly the theme was different. The picture of her was doing a different theme. And there's like 20 different variations based on how wide your browser window was, which was
Oh,
super cool.
that is really
And
cool.
things
Uh,
like that are legitimately innovative.
yeah. And full disclosure, Micro.Blog does use Bootstrap, although it's been so long and it's such an ancient version that like I don't think it really resembles Bootstrap that much anymore, because like all the buttons are customized and But anyway, just I'd
What's
throw
old
that
is
out
new
there.
again.
I totally get I totally get your comment.
No, no, and I'm not criticizing web
Yeah.
applications that use it. It's just that for a while it seemed to be the only toolkit for the
Yeah.
web, and
Totally.
I think at this point we have a lot of variation now. Thank goodness.
Hmm.
So, um,
Yeah.
are there any experiences and features that you are looking to add to Micro.Blog that you haven't put in yet? Like, what is like kind of your vision for what's next or what's coming?
Yeah, A lot is just improving sort of the foundation and the plumbing that is there. So like there's always more to do for performance, fixing glitches and bugs and things like that. Because of the sort of has interesting layer of like how we connect like Hugo and the timeline and Micro.Blog also kind of at its core like can download posts from other feeds. So like,
Mm.
you don't have to host your blog with Micro.Blog. You could host it on WordPress and then it'll just pull in the posts. And so it is sometimes fragile. And so there's always more work to do to make that more robust. I've been doing a bunch of work behind the scenes on that lately. And in terms of like new features, we have like bookmarking and highlighting and stuff in web pages. And there's a lot I want to do around that still. So that I used to use Instapaper. I used to use Pinboard,
Mm.
and I now have just consolidated all of that to Micro.Blog because it can manage bookmarks and I can blog about the things that I'm bookmarking.
Oh yeah.
And we added like tags to bookmarks and things like that so you can organize them. So there's some more along those lines that will be rolling out pretty soon, which again, it seems a little bit off to the side of blogging, but it all kind of connects together. And it, like having Micro.Blog be this kind of like suite of apps almost where it's like you pay one subscription, you get a bunch of little things that are next to the blog. I found it. I don't know. I just find it really nice.
Yeah. I was actually curious because I know that you offer a premium paid plan and you also offer a free plan. Could you kind
Yep.
of talk about how those two things differ and maybe how
Mm-hmm.
you arrived on what things should be paid for and what things people could have?
Yeah. So the basic thing, basically there's free, there's $5 a month, which is like the standard plan that most people probably should have if they want to use Micro.Blog, and then there's Micro.Blog Premium, and then we also have like a family plan, which is like if you want a blog that has like multiple people,
Hmm.
kind of like a team that helps maintain the blog. But at its core, it's the $5 and the $10. The free is like most of the stuff we've talked about. So like following people, the timeline, replying to people, like the book stuff too, like keeping track of what books you're reading, all that kind of stuff. That's all free. The apps are all free. The apps are all open source too, Mac, iOS, Android. Um, but for free, we don't host the blog for you. That's the catch. So
Ah,
if you want sort of things to be more integrated and just taken care of, the $5 a month plan, now we host the blog for you. Like,
hmm.
and there's more or less no limits on that as long as it's a personal blog and you're not like backing up your computer to your blog.
Yeah.
It's as many posts as you want, long posts, short posts, photos, whatever. And then at the $10 we add like podcast hosting and newsletters and stuff.
That's awesome. That's super cool.
And
So,
yeah, and honestly, I like our pricing. Like something about $5 a month, I just really like pricing. Everything goes up, and it's like actually good luck finding a blog host that is not either free or more than $5. So like
yeah.
free, you'll have ads and things like that, or you self-host it and you pay your own hosting. But I've always liked the sort of like it's $5. A lot of people can afford $5, and we've never changed the price, and
Huh?
um, we may never change it, but we'll keep making like sort of the bigger tiers like more valuable and that sort of thing. But I try to keep it as simple as possible. It's like it does a bunch of stuff, and yeah, here it is.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. What are your thoughts on the direction that the Fediverse is going with Reddit and Twitter? It seems like more and more people are coming by the day sometimes, or sometimes we have these huge bursts of users coming in. And I know that through ActivityPub, Microblog is a part of that. Like, what does that landscape look like from your vantage point?
So interesting. It's honestly, I think it's going really well. I guess I'll say that because like when I used to complain about Twitter, when I started writing my book about like, let's have more open APIs and things like that, not new ideas, but just like
No.
as I'm exploring this stuff, honestly didn't think we'd be as far as we are right now. I
Yeah.
really think it's looking good. Like there's so many people now that are aware of the problems of big networks, big ad-based companies. They're aware of privacy issues. Um, and so I really like what's happening. And there's also a lot
Yeah.
of innovation, people trying new things, people forking projects, trying, trying to take things in different directions. And then there's weird stuff. I don't mean weird in a bad way, but like we're talking about the book stuff. You have like Bookworm and like Fediverse stuff that's just for a specific peer-to stuff that's like for a specific type of content, but that's still
Yeah.
compatible with the Fediverse. So I really like where things are going. I think in general that like where I think at some point Mastodon might not be like the 90% of the
Yeah.
market. And actually, I think if one sort of player has most of the market, it does kind of create some problems because they don't necessarily have to work on compatibility as much. Everybody else has to be compatible with them.
Right.
The indie web talks about one of their principles is kind of like monoculture of like, there's just like one thing that sort of dominates everything, and that can create problems.
Right.
But I feel like it's about to be just turned upside down with Threads because Threads, they're starting to experiment with ActivityPub support. It's going a little slower than I would have guessed. Like they just have it enabled for a couple accounts, and it didn't work with Micro.Blog at first. I had to figure out what was wrong, and I fixed it. But like so, Micro.Blog now you can follow the Threads users. There's only a few that like have it enabled, but when Threads actually opens that up, it's going to be really interesting, and I'm not sure what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I've kind of been on the record from the beginning though of like embrace the Threads, joining the Fediverse, don't block them, because if you had asked me like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if Facebook would like just completely do a 180, and instead of like shutting down their API, they would just become more open, I would say like that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
Even if I disagree with a lot of decisions they've made as a platform, even though I think they've caused a lot of problems, if it's more open and compatible with other platforms, that generally I think is just going to be good. So we'll see what happens, but I think it's early days. I think things are just really interesting from here on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, from the vantage point of a huge influx of people, are you concerned about backlash to connecting them or trust and safety issues? Like, how do you think Microblog is going to have to deal with that?
That's a great question, and I think we don't know how. So it sounds to me like Threads, their current plan is not to just enable for everybody. So it'll
No.
be kind of like an opt-in. Yeah, it'll be like if I'm on Threads, I can like check a checkbox, and now people can follow me. So I don't expect at the beginning it'll be too. Honestly, I don't know. To be honest, I just don't know.
Yeah.
And it kind of gets back to I wish had a little bigger team, because you could imagine a situation where there are a lot of kind of trust and safety issues, a lot of things that we need to stay on top of. Um, so I can't, I don't know. Honestly, I can't even predict how it's going to
No,
go,
that's
but it's definitely going to shake things up, because you're going to go from Mastodon having, again, like 90% or whatever of the Fediverse. I don't know what the number is, but
yeah.
a big share of the Fediverse, to all of a sudden Threads being the big share of the Fediverse.
Yeah.
And Threads, like they're trying to do, I think that team is trying to do the right thing. They're trying to have an API, and they're trying to like, be open. Um, but at the same time, like I'm not going to blame anyone that doesn't totally trust them in the way they would trust, um,
Oh, yeah.
Mastodon and people that are just like really all in on the open web.
Yeah, 100%. So, I also wanted to talk a little bit about your book.
Mhm.
You've mentioned it a few times, and I think it's important to give that a highlight as well. Could you talk about a little bit about indie microblogging and your work on it?
Yeah. Yeah. So this came out of the Kickstarter project. The whole thing is on the web now at book.micro.blog, and you can kind of poke around. It really turned into this sprawling kind of project. I don't know. I don't know what I was getting into. It's probably way too long. It has lots of like personal diversions where I talk about my thoughts on this. But it's finally sort of wrapped up. I have an EPUB version, and then I'll have the print and PDF version to follow shortly. But the idea was really just like, how can we rethink again, not to repeat myself too much what I've already said, but like we have these big platforms. Like, how can we rethink things a little bit so that everything has open APIs, and so that things are as centered around blogging as possible? So you post to your own site. So there's stuff about the Fediverse. There's stuff about ActivityPub. Some of it's technical, like here's what the JSON looks for
Yeah.
ActivityPub, and here's how WebFinger works, and some of it, and on the indie website too, like here's how Micro.Pub works if you want to post to your website with that API, and then some of it's more philosophical, just like where did all this come from? Like what happened with Twitter? What happened with Tumblr? Like what happened with the early web and the blogosphere?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Manton. This has been a really enlightening conversation, and it's always exciting to get into the weeds with any new platform. I say new as in new to me. I know that
Yeah.
Micro.Blog's been around for a while. Before we depart, is there anything that you'd like to share with our audience? Things on your mind, advice for people trying to start out building on open APIs, anything of that nature?
I don't know. Yeah, just I'm excited, and I think you can almost, if you're just starting out and you're like embracing the Fediverse, whether you're a developer or just posting stuff, like I don't think there's necessarily a wrong way to approach it. Like I think everyone is coming from a different perspective, and so yeah, see what's out there, see how you think you fit into the world. I do think there's something to like having our space on the internet be something we control that is just it's kind of like a foundation that will matter no matter what like the exact protocols like end up looking like.
No, and I think for a while you control your own data, you own your data, you own your online experience. Like, I think in a lot of ways people didn't necessarily grasp what that meant, because data at the end of the day, like you think of the word, it's just text and numbers, right? No, it's like your personal experiences and your content and the people you talk to online and the
Mm-hmm.
the private thoughts that you share. And I think giving that a tangible face like a blog or your personal website or something you can basically control every aspect of is such an important thing for people to understand. Like, you're not just moving some JSON blob around, you're like actually building your online spot that you hang out in that's cozy for you.
Yeah, totally. And there's just so much potential too, and just the fact that we are at the point now where you can like move your followers between platforms and things don't just completely break is really, I mean, at some point we're going to take that for granted at some point, but
Yeah.
it really is like a level up sort of the social web.
Yeah.
I'm really excited.
I'm excited too. Well, thank you all for listening to the Decentered podcast. I'm Sean Tilley. You can follow us on We Distribute at news@wedistribute.org for our main site through ActivityPub, or you can follow us on a variety of platforms that we cross-post to using a posse-like method. You can follow us on recite what they are. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Mastodon, Nostr, Blue Sky, and you can also support us on opencollective.com/WeDistribute and patreon.com/WeDistribute. You can also follow Manton on Micro.Blog/Manton or Manton at Manton.blog, is it?
Org.
Org.
Manton at
Manton@Manton.org.
Yep.
Thank you all for listening. You've been the best. Thanks.